Hello and welcome back to Whole You Frequency podcast. So, today we are continuing our series of quantum anatomy. As natural, we're always trying to climb higher and higher and higher, especially when we talk about the frequencies. So, on the frequency spectrum, we started to talk about the densest layer. We started to talk about the physical body. How can we assess and see that from the quantum physics, multidimensional medicine perspective? How can we work with it? Then we talked about emotional body. What is the emotion from the quantum physics perspective? What is the emotion in the multidimensional spectrum that we're constantly living in? And naturally, now we are stepping into the mental body. Mental body is very interesting for me personally and professionally because a lot of us, we actually identify with our mental body. You know, if we would have to draw the pie chart of your self-awareness, it's very, very interesting to see what chunk of that pie chart would be actually taken from mental body, right? What is the perception layer? What is the scale that you're actually perceiving yourself as your mind and the mental space? Obviously, when we talk about the mind and the mental body, we are talking about conscious and subconscious mind simultaneously. A lot of times we are not even aware what's actually happening in our mental body. We actually know that 95% of what's happening in our mental body is unconscious processing. So we are basically trusting the most those last 5% that it's most of the time is just metabolite. So as you start noticing, mental body is just the grid of beliefs, concepts, perception filters. And when we are trying to be as aware as we can be, especially when we try to treat someone, we have to see how much mental body is actually participating in everything that someone is experiencing. Before we dive there, I think it's really beneficial for us to talk about the nature of the mental body. Since it's still related with anatomy, you have to know that it's a magnetoelectric structure. It's also crystalline and very structural. If we know that emotional body is a fluid, right? The mental body would be the glass that holds the water. The mental body holds the architecture of interpretation. This body obviously has your thoughts, inherited belief systems, because we always, when we talk about mental and emotional body, we are literally opening the Pandora's box. What percentage of my thought is actually my own thought? What of that is actually collective belief? What of that is DNA level belief? Because a lot of us, we are holding just cheap Chinese copy beliefs in our system, fully thinking that this is who I am and this is the layer of me and this is what I have to trust. I went to the event where I think there were 13,000 people. And when the host asked, how many of you guys feel like you are not enough? How many of you have thoughts that you are not doing enough? At least 10,000 people actually raised their hands. Then the question that actually sparked in my head is like, wait, how could I identify with that? How can I think that this is me, this is about me, if 10,000 other people in this room alone think exactly the same thing? It must be some cheap copy that we just all bought into. And this is why the mental space is so interesting, because it holds the architecture. The body is composed of thought forms, inherited belief systems, perceptual filters, and unconscious contracts and the things that we are constantly unconsciously interacting with. So when we talk about the mental space, that Pandora's box has to always be in your perception. Everything that you think is not necessarily yours. And you've heard that enough times. But I'm here to tell you that from the physics perspective, very, very small fraction of what you actually think is actually who you are. But you allow that to be the biggest chunk of your self-awareness. So one thing that we have to actually talk when we talk about the mental space, especially in the multidimensional healing, how the constructs, how do beliefs actually form? Because we know that beliefs are a form of kind of repeated emotional and mental pairing. When pain is unresolved, when any type of emotion is unresolved, the mind will build the logic to protect that. For example, I'm not safe to express my emotion if I never had that experience. It becomes a silent law and regulation that your system is actually functioning based on. And a lot of us, we have this emotional charge somewhere back down in the system that we're not aware of. It's very distant in time. And hey, the more distant in time it is, the more energy it takes for your body to actually bring it back and build the structure around it. It all happens in the unconscious mind, so you don't know that most of your beliefs are actually just the protection mechanisms for the emotions that you were not able to feel. Again, keep in mind the Pandora's box. Some of those beliefs are not even valid anymore because since we have the DNA, they don't have the expiration date. Whatever was valid for your grandmother might not be valid in this day and age. But if it's still in your DNA, your mental belief can still feel the certain way. And scarcity is one of the best examples of that. We see people who experience bankruptcy and then their grandchildren, after a few generations, they actually dealing with a lot of thoughts that are based on loss. And that's why the mind is, in my opinion, that's the least space that you should trust. If you want an actual true answer, go into like A, your intuition, B, into your physical body. Your emotional and mental bodies are the most compromised bodies there are. Is the thought and emotion not truth? Of course your emotion is the truth. But it does not mean that it's a present moment emotion. It could have been truth in the past, but it does not necessarily mean that it's still the truth. And mental field acts like a time loop, right? Mental constructs, they often operate as closed loops in the quantum field. They endlessly projecting the same lens on the new situation until the field disruption, aka healing, actually occurs. Until that happens, you are in the same loop. Your mind is just the filter that you're perceiving the reality with. And sometimes when I observe the conflict, because a lot of times I work with couples, I see that we're just seeing two mental bodies that are probably just jumped into the fragment when they were 13 or 14 years old, screaming at each other. There is no resolution there. Resolution is when we actually are coming from the healthy part of the psyche. And the mental and emotional bodies, as a reminder, I want to put it here, mental and emotional bodies, they're called psyche. So whatever is going on in your emotional body, your mental field will try to protect it. Sometimes when we meet someone, when you meet a man and you feel like, oh my God, he's so attractive, I feel something towards him. Well, your mind will give you all the ideas why it's actually a good idea, because your mind's job is just to make sure that it protects the emotion that you feel at that moment. But you know that once you're feeling change, your mind goes like, oh my God, what did I see in him? Why we even been together? Because once your emotion changes, your mind has to adapt right away. But remember, we all have emotional home that we're constantly living in. So your mind becomes a construct. It becomes a prison for the actual emotion that we try to keep. We don't try to keep it because it's the best emotion to feel. Well, that emotion also affects your physiology and your state. Your state is the biggest asset that you have, because coming from the really sluggish mental, emotional, and physical state will not lead you to the billion-dollar business. We have to change the state first if we want to have the different action. A lot of times people try to take the different action, try to change the behavior before changing the state. That is the direct path to the burnout. Can it work? It can for someone. For most people, it would really require for them to learn how to change their inner state. Again, that's the most important asset that you actually have, because different state would lead you to the different thoughts, would lead you to the different emotions and the different physiology. So it's really when belief becomes charged, right? It can become self-perpetuating and even create a crave that feels like a reality, or the repetition over and over again. But this is how the actual quantum field works. There are a few factors that actually affect your mental field. Obviously, repetitive narratives, whatever you see constantly on your social media, even if you think that it's like, oh, I'm not following that, like I don't buy into that, whatever you repetitively put into your mental field, it tries to look for the space in your mental field. We actually did the research and we saw that even giving someone completely new information changes their mental field in real time when you're measuring the biophotons. Collective ideologies. We are all coming from a different collective grid. Obviously, parental thought forms, whatever our parents told us, right? Like it's really difficult to make money, or like money doesn't go on trees. Like these are the very popular ones. And obviously, there are a lot of distorted perceptions that born from survival. And most of that survival is not even valid at this point in time. Most of that survival is a DNA level survival that it's still running in your mind space. There's a big, big, big topic about the psychic imprinting from education, from media, from religious, from esoteric systems. Wherever you go, that is all affecting your psyche. So actually making sure that you are not a trash can for the information is extremely important. That's why we see that everyone who's becoming more self-aware and trying to understand the field level anatomy of self, they would want to be more in silence, because no one wants to be the trash can of information. You know what it's actually doing for you. It will find the space to live in your mental field. And your mental field will build a narrative around it. Your mental field will create emotion around it. And that obviously becomes your reality. We sometimes see that big imprint for the mental field is disassociation from emotional truth. And obviously, we replace that with hyper logic, mental bypassing, and I don't believe it until I see it. Well, I haven't seen crypto, but I still believe and own crypto. So it's a really, really interesting field that we are talking about. A lot of times people feel like, oh, if I don't see it, it's just in me. I just hear that. The mental body is just a protective matrix. When emotional pain becomes overwhelming, the mind will generate the structure to explain, avoid, contain the charge. These are known as psychologically as defense mechanisms. And energetically, we can call them as armor. Mental defenses are not only psychological, they are structured frequency formations that are actually maintaining your architecture. They can manifest as very rigid thought loops. They can manifest as denial of reality or even disassociation. So let's actually mention a few defense systems, right? Defense mechanisms. In the mental field, a lot of times we see intellectualization. So basically, what we are seeing from the quantum perspective is just the elevation of mental field to avoid magnetic, aka emotional field. We just jumping from the emotional to mental. It's like obviously what we see as a signature, we see disconnection from our heart. Another defense mechanism is a projection in externalizing the internal charge onto another's field. Well, energetically, it forms entanglement loop with others' emotional bodies. Every time when you project something and you think that it's someone else's fault, and life is happening in between people. We are individuals in the collective field. We're always affected. And I'm not saying that everything is your fault, but every time when you intellectually project something on someone else, on your spouse, on your teacher, on the government, whatever it is, you are actually forming the entanglement with that person's emotional body. And that is the price that you really don't want to pay. Suppression is another defense mechanism, which is actually collapsing the wave before it fully manifests, meaning that charge will be stored somewhere and most likely in some organs or systems of yours. We have rationalization, another common thing, where we actually force incoherence where incoherence exists. What happens? It's artificial order in your grid. It can exist, but it's artificial. And there is a difference between the real and artificial. And every human being can feel the difference. Disassociation is a big one, and people talk a lot about that. But basically, from the quantum field, it's a fragmentation of the field. It's a timeline rupture. And these fractals, they literally become frozen in your nonlinear field. And that affects your psyche so much. We will talk about the psyche fragmentation, and we will have the full episode about it because it's a big topic. Another thing, it's a minimization where we actually shrinking amplitude of pain. Well, what we are doing, we actually creating low charge mental numbing grid. And I know that these words can actually sound like, wait, what? How is that even possible? Mental field is just my thoughts or just beliefs that I have. Mental field is way more than that. These defense mechanisms that we just named, they actually work and serve as a survival. But they become prison when they actually left and examine it. From a healing standpoint, we must meet these structures of obviously with compassion to actually reorganize the distortion that intelligence is trying to hold. And your mental field is extremely intelligent. I think that mental field is one of the most intelligent fields. But when the field actually fractures because of trauma or any experience that it's too much for your psyche to hold, we lose those parts of selves. They remain stuck. That's why a lot of times the healing feels like walking in the circle over and over again. That's why we sometimes feel like we're regressing when it's actually not true. But we are not regressing, we are just looping back and forth to recover the parts that actually were forgotten somewhere in time. A lot of times when what we actually see that there's not a regression, but you're just bumping into your own field where the same issue exists. Because if you just try to solve that actually with the talk therapy, well, the talk therapy cannot integrate the fractals of self or anything that it's locked in time and space. Every trauma will create the splinter, a version that has suspended charge where it's actually will be repeated until it's fully integrated. That's why the situations repeat itself. Someone can call it manifestation. I would say that it's a psyche's way to seek for resolution. Your psyche will put you in the same circumstances with different people, with different faces and names, in different setups to actually find the resolution. And that's why mental field constantly repeat thoughts, emotions, and the actual setups over and over and over again. So healing here, healing the mental field will require you to know about your emotional and physical self. And this is exactly where we can find so much information, because whatever is going on in your mental and emotional field, well, it's the matter of time when it's actually going to be visible in your physical body. So if you want to trust something, again, trust your intuition, but learn how to separate intuition from emotional charge or mental belief structure that might not be even yours, and your physical body. Result is never a lie. Your physical body will hold the information that mental and emotional repressed. And I think for the homework, the best part is to actually draw your self-awareness chart and see what chunk is actually your mentality, what part of that is emotional self, what part of that is your soul, what part of that is your physical body. And you will see that whoever is driving your vehicle, you know the destination, you know where that part is going. And if the mental field is your biggest chunk of awareness, you will constantly be looping in the mental thoughts. Change physiology, change the state, change the emotional state, and your mind space would change. The mind space is just the protector. And if you spend all your time intellectualizing, rationalizing, and trying to understand your trauma, I'm sorry, but you are feeding exactly the same demon. And the job here is to actually see, what is my mind protecting me from feeling? And then completely different healing can open up for you. And we will start diving deeper into more supramental layers where fragmentation will be explained. But here I want you to know that mental field is just one part of you. It's an extremely important part of you. But that part of you, a lot of times, is just the one big protective mechanism.